Well, we're continuing a series we started last week called Love Killers. And, Love Killers, this is based off some research from a guy named John Gottman. And I've heard of a lot of research and read a lot of research, but this guy fascinates me more than anybody else. And what this guy has done is he's been studying couples for 20 years. And he can sit down with a couple, and over a few hours of watching them and recording them and talking with them, he can actually predict with 94% accuracy whether a couple will divorce or not. That is amazing. 94% accuracy. And he wrote down some of this information in a great book called Why Marriages Succeed and Fail. Last week I started talking about this book. I'm going to talk about it some more this week. But what he found here is that there were some things that kind of killed marriage, that they killed love. And there were 4 things in particular that he found that really did a number on love and really led to the destroying of a marriage. So what he found, last week we talked about criticism. This week we're going to talk about contempt. He also found defensiveness and stonewalling. That's what we're going to talk about the next couple weeks. And then the 5th week, we've actually added a 5th week to the series. Pafo and I are going to do a Q&A. We're going to be up there, here, put a couple chairs, and we're going to answer any questions you want about marriage and dating and relationships and love killers and all of that. Okay? But so criticism, we talked last week about criticism. And what criticism is this attacking of another person, where you take a specific incident and then you attack their character, or you blame them, or you use words like, you always, you never, or you globalize stuff. All of a sudden, one dirty dish becomes, you're so irresponsible. All of that is criticism. And I challenged you last week to say it's time for us to call criticism what it is, sin. And I challenge you with this, that sin attacks a person. Love attacks a problem. And I think married couples, we spend way too much time attacking each other and not nearly enough time attacking the problems that we face. Well, this week, and that video is up online. I highly encourage you to watch it. It was great. We've been getting great response from it. It was a great way to kick off this series. So this week is on contempt. Now, that's a word that we all kind of know, but not many of us really know. Like, what is contempt? Well, let me give you a picture of contempt that really is how John Gottman described it. Okay? Here are that contempt is essentially, it is the intention to insult or psychologically abuse another person. Okay? Let me state this again. That it's an intent to insult or psychologically abuse another person. Another way to think of contempt is this expression of superiority. You ever been in the middle of the fight and you're absolutely convinced that you're better than your spouse? That in whatever you're fighting about, you are absolutely convinced that you're better and they're worse. And then you start getting angry enough and you remind them that you're better and they're worse. You've ventured into contempt territory. Now, out of these 4 love killers, I don't really do contempt. Now, I do the other one, so you're going to hear some stories from me the next couple weeks. But so once again, I thought I'd bring up my wife, who for years of our early marriage did contempt much better than I ever have. And so I thought I'd have her tell a little bit of what our early years in marriage looked like and how contempt played itself out with us.
So last week I shared that I was really critical of Greg and our marriage early on. Well, it's easy for criticism to move into contempt. Because if all you can see is the wrong that the other person does, it's easy to begin to see them as worse than you are. So part of my contempt for Greg early on was to just think, how could he not know better? Like, that was my attitude. No matter what he did, I would just think, how could he not know any better? And it got to the point where I wouldn't even have to say a word. I would just look at him and he would know that he had done something wrong and that he had to either fix it really quickly or figure out what it was. But this idea that I just thought my way was better and that I was better and that I was doing it right and he was doing it wrong, that was my contempt.
And once again, thanks be to God that God transforms lives and transforms marriages, and that's not really a part of our life and marriage anymore. So, let me give you a few signs of contempt. Okay, a few signs of what contempt looks like in a marriage. Okay, one of the clearest signs is insults and name calling. Okay, have you ever been in the middle of a fight and lashed out a few choice names to your spouse? Stupid, lazy, irresponsible, incompetent. You ever shouted a few of those? Yeah, that's contempt. Okay, another one is hostile humor, where you make a joke, but really you're taking a shot at your spouse under this thinly veiled guise of a joke. So it's like, oh man, yeah, dude, you're so lucky. Your wife cooks great, man. Mine can burn rice. Ha 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 ha. Meanwhile, she's dying inside. Or the wife comes home and lashes out at the husband, like, you forgot everything. You forgot to go to the store. You forgot to put gas. I'm surprised you didn't forget the baby. Ha ha ha. Take a little cheap shot. That's what hostile humor is. When you take those little cheap shots and you sort of laugh it off. If you've ever followed up something with, I'm just kidding, can't you take a joke? Then you've got hostile humor in your life. Okay? Because the point of it really is to criticize, is to take that pot shot right there. Okay? What else? Here's another one. Mockery. When you just mock the other person. Okay? This is the art of the subtle put down. Okay, they're in the middle of a fight, and the husband kind of softens, be like, no, but I really do care about you. And then the wife kind of fed up goes, oh, sure, you really care about me. Okay, yeah. Okay? That you're kind of mocking them. When someone tries something good and you're like, oh, sure. Okay? That's mockery. That's a form of contempt. And then one of the other ones is body language. And one of them is eye rolling. You ever done this in the middle of a conversation? That's contempt. You're kind of doing it with your body. Okay? Or the other one that I'll see, someone trying to talk to you, and guys, we got to fess up to this one. Your wife or your girlfriend is trying to talk to you, and you just kind of stay on your phone. Yeah. Yeah, I'll get that. Put the phone down. What? And then it becomes a big thing. You ever done? Yeah. Okay? So staying on your phone and kind of ignoring the other person. Okay? The other one are facial expressions. You can show contempt even just with your face. Okay, how about this? Didn't even need to say anything. And it just oozed, yeah, right. That's contempt. Okay, so we can do it with our face. We can do it with a little sneer. Be like, throw that with the eye roll and then the deep breath. Contempt written all over it. So if you've got some of this, if any of those sound familiar to you, you've got a little bit of this love killer in you. Okay, let's see. Do we have audio on the computer yet? Nope, not yet. Okay, that's all right. So, now, have you ever had one of these where you've had an argument where maybe you've lashed out some of this? You threw out a few choice names, a few four-letter words you can't repeat in church, and you got really angry. And then afterwards, you're like, oh, why did I do that? You ever ask that question? Like, oh, why did I say those things? Okay. More importantly, we kind of ask, well, you have to figure out, why do we do that? Well, I sat down with Paul and kind of brainstormed. Here are some reasons that I think. So if you've got a little contempt in you, if you've got a little of this love killer in your relationship, Here are some possible reasons why you might be doing it. Okay? And let me know if any of these kind of click with you. So the first is you want them to change. You're so lazy. Well, of course, that means, well, thank you very much. I never realized I was lazy before. Man, I need to work a lot harder. I think that's what some of your parents probably think. When they'll call you lazy, and then all of a sudden you expect that, like, this light bulb to go up and be like, whoa, thank you, Mom and Dad. You are a fount of wisdom I have never seen before. I never realized spending 8 hours watching Netflix. That's lazy. Okay. You want them to change. And somehow by pointing this out to them, you think that will help them change. Okay. Another one is, you ever had this? Well, you need to hear this. I'm right, you need to hear this. You need to hear how irresponsible you are. You need to hear how bad you are with money and you're costing us. You need this. Because obviously you are completely oblivious to the fact that you're irresponsible or lazy or angry. Okay? Then the other reason I think a lot of us do that, because you think it's the truth. It's just that, why shouldn't I say it? It's true. But then you lash out with these mocking, these names, all of that stuff, the contempt that really kind of kills love. Because there's this thing about contempt. If you've ever been on the receiving end of contempt, it feels horrible. And it feels kind of like you're just getting crushed. You're just a can, and each harsh word, each insult just crushes you further and further until eventually you get enough of these things and you end up kind of a fraction of what you once were. And if you've ever been around someone who's been the recipient of a lot of contempt, and maybe that's you. You've lived with these angry words and these insults for a long, long time, and you just feel crushed. Because that's kind of what contempt does. Well, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? Because the other fascinating thing about contempt, out of these 4 love killers, these 4 weeks, what Gottman's research showed is that this one, contempt, is actually the number 1 predictor of divorce. Marriages can survive a lot of other stuff, but marriages cannot survive contempt. Marriages can work through criticism. We did. Marriages can work through defensiveness, which it will be next week. They can work through stonewalling, which is like withdrawing. But if contempt is not dealt with, relationships cannot survive. We barely did. And I think if this pattern of contempt that was early in our marriage, if it had continued, we might not have survived. So this one's pretty serious. It is the number 1 predictor of divorce. So you need to understand that if any of that sounded familiar, you're walking dangerous territory. You're walking the frozen lake in spring with just a little bit of ice. And your marriage is going to go crashing down kind of at any point. Okay? So this is stuff we need to be able to stop. But how? How do we stop contempt? How do we get rid of this love killer in our relationships? Especially if it's been around a few years. Maybe some of you grew up in homes where name-calling and mocking was sort of normal. And now your home is kind of normal as well. How do we stop this? Why should we stop this? If it's the truth, why shouldn't I say it? If they need to hear it, if they're not paying attention, if they're ignoring me, they need to hear it. So why should I stop? Well, it's too bad in the Bible everyone gets along, because otherwise the Bible could give us some advice about this. But clearly everyone got along perfectly fine in the Bible, and there were no fights or arguments or people feeling contemptuous toward one another. Well, thankfully that's not true at all. There was a lot of fighting in the Bible. There was a lot of arguing. Even in the early church, there was arguing, and there was fights, and there was name-calling, and there was contempt. And so I want to tell you about one situation that was going on in the early church in Rome. So in Rome, it kind of had a mix of two Christians, and most of the early church had a mix of two Christians. There were Gentile Christians who were non-Jews. In this case, they were Romans. And so there were Roman Christians who were Gentile. And then there were Jewish Christians who grew up Jewish, realized that Jesus was the Messiah that the Old Testament talked about, believed in Jesus, and then they became what we would call Christians. And these two groups often got in arguments because the Jewish Christians, especially the newer ones, they would argue that they still needed to follow the laws of Moses. And in the Old Testament, there are a lot of laws that God gave through Moses about what to eat, what to wear, what to do, what holidays, religious holidays to celebrate. And so there was a lot of law about that. Meanwhile, the Gentile Christians didn't grow up with that. And so the Jewish Christians are saying, I absolutely believe that Jesus is Messiah, but we also have to obey the law of Moses because we're Jews. Meanwhile, the other ones are saying, no, we don't. We don't have to. Jesus came to abolish the law. We don't have to follow that. We can eat what we want. We can wear what we want. We don't have to celebrate all of these holidays that you guys celebrated. Okay, so do you see kind of the difference of opinion? Okay. Now, on a good day, it's just a difference of opinion. On a bad day, it's an all-out brawl. And that seems to be what was happening in the church in Rome. That there were these two groups of people who were all out warring against each other with a lot of anger and a lot of contempt. So Paul has to talk about that. And he addressed that group. And so in Romans 14, he directly addresses the people who say, we can eat whatever we want. Bacon cheeseburger, coming my way. And then the other ones are like, no, we can't eat those things. Or we have to celebrate these certain religious holidays. Okay? And so that was the big fight that Paul addressed. So to give you a sense of the book of Romans, the first 11 chapters of the book of Romans talks about core theology of the Christian faith. So that's chapters 1 through 11. Chapters 12 through 15 then talk about how do you live out that faith. We're going to be talking about chapter 14 right about here. So this is one of the ways that Paul is talking about to these Christians in Rome, these two, they really were factions at that point because they were all up against each other, hating on each other and all of that. Okay? And so he wrote, and here's a little bit of what he wrote to these groups. So, and he uses it, so remember, it's one group that was saying we can only eat certain things, another group saying we can eat anything we want, and then one group saying we have to honor these religious holidays, and the other group says, no, we can go fishing whenever we want. Okay? I don't know if they fished or not, but they probably did. Yeah, okay. So that was the battle going on. Now, so what we're going to read the first 12 verses of Romans 14. So Romans 14, 1 through 12. If you've got it on your screen, you can pull that up. It'll also be up here. Okay? And he starts out with this phrase, I'll start out with Romans 14, 1 through 12. Accept the one whose faith is weak, without quarreling over disputable matters. Let's pause there. Okay, that's his thesis. That's his core premise. That's his topic sentence. Remember writing papers with topic sentences? That's his topic sentence. Let me say it again. Accept the one whose faith is weak without quarreling over disputable matters. Okay, and don't get too hung up on this. He's being so judgmental, the faith weak statement. That's a term that he's using for these folks, the Jewish Christians, and he's identifying that weakness as they still want to hold on to the law. And he's basically telling these guys, stop fighting over this. Okay? So, back with verse 1. Except the one whose faith is weak without quarreling over disputable matters. One person's faith allows them to eat anything. Okay? These guys. Okay? Right here. But another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. Over here. Now, I'm not saying vegetarians have weak faith. Don't take that. That's not what Paul's saying here. Vegans and vegetarians can be perfectly strong Christians. Okay. So one person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything, and here it is, must not treat with contempt the one who does not. And the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does. And here's a key phrase right here. For God has accepted them. That's the first reason that Paul gives why contempt should not have any part in a marriage or in a church. Because God, that person you're feeling so angry with, God has accepted them. And then he even says, who are you to judge someone else's servant? So I love that who do you think you are? Feeling contempt over someone whom God has accepted. And you can't accept them. Who do you think you are? I like that's my loose translation, but who do you think you are to judge somebody else's servant? To their own masters, servants stand and fall. He's basically saying, these people you're angry with, God's their master, not you. And unfortunately, I know a lot of spouses who think they're the master of their partner. Unfortunately, a lot of boyfriends and girlfriends who kind of think they're the master of their partner. I know, and there's a little bit of a cultural overlay here. We won't get into that yet, and gender roles and all of that, okay? But what Paul is saying is that person, God is their master, not you. Okay? And they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. Okay? So there's the first paragraph about the food. Now he starts talking about holidays. One person considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so for the Lord, for they give thanks to God. And whoever abstains, in other words, doesn't celebrate that holiday, does so for the Lord and gives thanks to God. For none of us lives for ourselves alone. And none of us dies for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, and here's the next big phrase, we belong to the Lord. There's the second reason Paul gives why contempt should not have any place in a marriage or in a church. That person you're so angry with, they belong to God, not you. And unfortunately, I think something happens in marriage where we get a sense of they kind of belong to us. And I've seen this in men and women. Okay? But they don't. They belong to God. So first, Paul says, God has accepted them. Who are you to not accept them? The second thing Paul says is that they belong to God, not you. Okay? Now let me go on. It says, for this reason, Christ died and returned to life, so that he might be the Lord of both the dead and the living. In other words, that person you're so angry with, Christ died for them. Okay? But a lot of times you want to put them up on the cross. But Paul says, that person you feel contempt with, Christ died for them. Let's continue. Okay. You then, why do you judge your brother or sister? Why do you treat them with contempt? There are those two words again. Judge, contempt. And here's the third reason why. Here it is. For we will all stand before God's judgment seat. You know, in the middle of a fight, when you really think you're right, you want to put the other person in God's judgment seat. But Paul reminds us, we all stand before God. And in case you forget that, he actually quotes from the Old Testament. He quotes out of Isaiah. It is written, as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before me. Every tongue will acknowledge God. We all someday will have to give an account of the words we use. We'll have to sit before God and give an account. Not just the person you think is wrong. Okay, so that's the third reason Paul gives why contempt should have no place in marriage. One, God has accepted them. Who are you to reject them? Two, they belong to God, not you. And third, we all will stand before God's judgment, not just the person you think is wrong. So can you still, with a good heart, kind of insult your spouse and mock them and take those little jabs in the form of jokes? I think it's a lot harder now. Because I want to read a couple more verses. The chapter continues, and Paul continues to talk about the eating and the holidays. But there are two verses I want to read out of it. The first one is verse 15. Listen to this. Do not by your eating destroy someone for whom Christ died. So husbands, do not by your arguing destroy your wife for whom Christ died. Wives, do not by your contempt destroy a husband for whom Christ died. Verse 20, do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. Do not destroy the work of God. Think about that. Wives, do not destroy the work of God in your husbands for the sake of some dirty dishes. Husbands, do not destroy the work of God in your wives because she reminds you a few times. Really? Is that enough for you to destroy the work of God? Because contempt destroys people. Remember? Contempt crushes the spirit. With every barb, with every joke, your spouse gets crushed a little more and a little more. Because, contempt crushes the spirit just to be right. Think about that. Contempt crushes the spirit just to be right. In the middle of it, you are so convinced that whatever you're arguing about is so important. And you want to call them that name because they need to hear it, because you're right, because it's the truth. Are you really willing to crush another person simply to be right? Is that really worth it? Contempt crushes the spirit just to be right. There's a famous Bruce Springsteen song, Born in the USA. Okay? It was a few years back, Born in the USA. Like that, you guys? Okay. If you never heard that, go look it up on YouTube. Get some good old 80s rock anthem going. Okay? But there's a great line in it. It's actually a very sad line. Feel like a dog that's been beat too much. You spend half your life just covering up. Ever spent half your life just covering up? Does it feel like you've just been beat down so much? And the truth is, maybe you're the one who does the beating. Contempt crushes the spirit. It's not love. It's not helping. There's only one thing contempt does. So you got to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth it to do this to your spouse, to your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your partner? Just to be right? So, like last week, I got a few questions here to see if this love killer is kind of a part of you. Okay? And these are kind of tough. These are going to be yes-no questions. I've got 4 of them. I want you to be honest. You don't have to write this down. You don't have to incriminate yourself. But track in your head to see if this love killer has kind of gotten into your relationship. Ready? First, when I get upset, I see glaring faults in my partner's personality. When I get upset, I see glaring faults in my partner's personality. Okay? The answer, yes or no. Okay, second one. When my partner gets negative, I think of insulting things to say back. When my partner gets negative, I think of insulting things to say back. Number 3, it's hard for me to see my spouse's point of view when we disagree. It's hard for me to see my spouse's point of view when we disagree. Okay, 4th, it's hard to respect my spouse when he or she is being incompetent. It's hard to respect my spouse when he or she is being incompetent. All right? Have you tallied a score? So if you said yes to a couple of these, chances are this love killer has made its way into your life, where contempt is a part of your thoughts and kind of in your heart and in your marriage, in your relationship. And that's a bad thing. Because remember, contempt crushes the spirit. Contempt crushes the spirit just to be right. So what do we do here? What do we do with this? Well, Gottman proposes this idea of building a culture of appreciation in your marriage. Building a culture of appreciation in your marriage. What does that look like? Well, let me give you 5 contempt-busting phrases you could use. You could use today. You don't even have to think that hard about these. But these are 5 guaranteed contempt-busting phrases. The more of these you've got, the less contempt you'll have in your marriage. First one, thank you. Just say thank you. Say it often. Say it like you mean it. All right, so first is thank you. Second is, I'm sorry. Rather than lashing back, just stop and say, I'm sorry. And if you were the one to lash, just say, I'm sorry. Another contempt-busting phrase, I forgive you. I could hold this against you, but I won't. I forgive you. Another one, quite simply, is, you're right. Instead of fighting, when they're saying something that's right, just say, you're right. Okay? Thank you. I'm sorry. I forgive you. You're right. And then the last one, and this is one I want to spend a couple minutes on, is I affirm you for blank. Okay? I actually believe that affirmations, affirming your spouse, is one of the most powerful things you can do in a marriage. It is one of the best things. It is one of the best things you can do to destroy contempt. And if you were here last week, you got one of these little cards. And I've got some more here. If you weren't here last week or if you lost it already. So here. And on these little cards, half of it was what we talked about last week. And my wife's going to pass them out. And Jess, can you give her a hand? Pass those guys. So we talked about last week about using I statements. This week, on the other half, and feel free, take one. Even if you took one last week, you can never have enough of these sitting around. But this week, I want to tell you about affirmations. I believe that affirmations are one of the things that saved our marriage. Because early in our marriage, we were part of a young couples group, and they actually forced us to do these not just once a week when we met together at church. They even challenged us to do it every day. So in the middle of this really critical, contemptuous, stonewalling, defensive time in our marriage, we had someone challenge us to affirm each other every day. And when you're angry at your spouse, this is hard. Well, let me tell you what affirmations are, okay? So you look on the card, it's the one with the two little faces. What affirmations are a time to affirm a character quality in your spouse. Here are the principles. First, husbands lead. This is a great time for husbands to lead their wives. Lead them in saying nice things, okay? So we love husbands to be the first one to lead, okay? So, and we tell people, sit knee to knee, eye to eye. None of these, hey, thanks for dinner. No, none of that, okay? Knee to knee, eye to eye. Be short and specific. I affirm you for your thoughtfulness when you took the trash out without me asking. Okay, you don't have to say, I affirm you for your thoughtfulness for taking out the trash, and then you did some dishes, and then you did that. No, just short and simple. Okay. Also, affirm character qualities in your spouse. It's really nice to thank him for taking out the trash. Or it's really nice to thank him for cooking dinner. But husband, you want a better way to affirm your spouse? I affirm you for your love for cooking a great dinner every single day. Now that's a lot better than thanks for cooking a great dinner. And then lastly, no backhanded affirmations. Okay, this is not the time to say, I affirm you for being so responsible this week, not like last week where you were a putz. No, none of that, okay? No backhanded affirmations. My challenge to you is if you do this daily, even every other day or so, it will radically transform your marriage. It will clear contempt out of there faster than you can blink. Because remember, contempt crushes the spirit just to be right. Affirmations and saying thank you and I love you and I'm sorry. Building that culture of appreciation is what begins to rebuild people. Now, if I were really cool, I'd be like, whoo. Cans don't really work that way. Thankfully, people do. So my encouragement to you is affirm, appreciate, because contempt will kill your relationship. And I want to be a church that affirms each other. I want to be a church filled with people who say great things to each other. Don't you? I don't want to be filled with a church of nagging wives like in Proverbs and lazy, irresponsible husbands. Nah. I want to be a church full of people, of you guys, who brag on their spouses instead of take those little cheap shots at them. Okay? So let's do that. Let's develop a culture of appreciation around here and back in your homes. And let's get rid of contempt, because we don't need more marriages destroyed. We need more marriages built up. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, you are a God who loves marriages, Lord, and you want them to be strong. You desire them to bring them together, God. But we confess, Lord, on behalf of myself, on behalf of this church, I confess how we screw that up with our own selfishness and our laziness and our irresponsibility and our over-controlling. Lord, all of that we do, we need your help. God, we need your help to live out this picture of what Paul calls us to get rid of our contempt, to get rid of our judging, and to really appreciate one another. We need your help. Lord, so come with us here. guide each person toward that goal of appreciating their spouse, their partner, their boyfriend, girlfriend, and their parents. And let us turn to you for help in that. Lord, so I lift them up. I lift them up, and I thank you in the name of Jesus. Amen.